My best friend of 12 years got my little sister pregnant, then disappeared. And now my parents are standing in my living room asking me to step up and be the father. I'm still trying to figure out which part of that sentence is the most insane. Let me back up. My name is Adrian. I'm 31 years old. I work as a project manager for a mid-size construction firm in Columbus, Ohio. I own a 2-bedroom condo, I drive a used F-150, and up until about 8 months ago, I thought I had a pretty solid grasp on who the people in my life actually were. My family, my friends, the people I trusted. I was wrong about all of it. His name was Zack, Zachary Holt. We met freshman year of high school when he sat down next to me in AP World History and immediately asked if he could copy my notes. I said no. He laughed. We were inseparable for the next 12 years. He was the best man at my cousin's wedding when I couldn't be there. He helped me move 3 times. I lent him $3,000 when he got laid off and never asked for it back, because that's what you do for someone you consider a brother. My sister's name is Becca. She's 24, 7 years younger than me, which means I spent a significant feat of my childhood being assigned the role of her unofficial protector. She's funny and stubborn, and way too trusting of people, which I always thought was a trait she'd grow out of. She didn't. I didn't know Zack and Becca even knew each other well. That's the part that still gets me. I thought they were acquaintances. People who existed in the same orbit because of me, who'd exchange pleasantries at birthday parties, and then go back to their separate lives. Turns out they'd been texting privately for the better part of 2 years. I found that out later, much later. The way I found out about all of it was not graceful. It was a Tuesday in October. I was over at my parents' place for dinner, which I do every couple of weeks because my mom guilt trips me if I don't. And honestly, I don't mind. Her pot roast is worth the drive. Becca was there too, which wasn't unusual. She lives about 20 minutes away, in an apartment she shares with a roommate. She seemed off that night. Quiet. She kept pushing food around her plate and not meeting my eyes. I thought she was stressed about work. After dinner, my mom asked me to come sit in the living room, which is never a good sign. My mom only says come sit in the living room when something is wrong. When I was 16, it meant my grandfather had died. When I was 23, it meant my parents were thinking about separating, which they ultimately didn't. So when she said those 5 words, I felt something drop in my stomach. Before she'd gotten through half of them, Becca was already sitting on the couch. My dad was standing near the fireplace with his arms crossed. My mom sat down next to Becca and took her hand. And Becca looked at me and said, "I need to tell you something, and I'm really sorry." She was pregnant, 11 weeks along. The father was Zack. I remember the silence that followed being very loud, like that specific kind of quiet that has weight to it. I looked at my sister, then I looked at the wall behind her. Then I looked at my dad, who was still standing with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. I didn't say anything for what felt like a full minute. Then I said, "Is that true?" Not to Becca. I don't know why I said it like that. She nodded anyway. I asked where Zack was. My mom said she'd called him earlier that day, and that he'd said he needed time to process. My dad muttered something under his breath. I asked Becca how long, and she said a few months, that it wasn't serious, that it just happened. She was crying before she finished the sentence. I left. I didn't slam the door or say anything dramatic. I just got up, got my jacket and drove home. I sat in my parking garage for about 45 minutes, staring at the concrete wall in front of my truck, and not thinking about anything clearly. Then I went upstairs and called Zack. He didn't pick up. He didn't pick up for 3 days. When he finally did, he sounded like he'd been sleeping badly. He started talking before I could, saying he was sorry, saying he didn't know what had happened, saying it was complicated. I let him talk for a while. Then I asked him one question. "Are you going to be there for the baby?" Long pause. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." I hung up. That was the last real conversation I had with Zack for 6 months. He ghosted my sister. He ghosted me. He moved out of his apartment. I found that out because I went over there and a different person answered the door. He eventually resurfaced in Phoenix, apparently living with some woman he'd met online. I didn't find that out from him. I found it out from his own mother, who called me to apologize like somehow that was her responsibility to carry. I'm not going to pretend those months were easy. Becca was struggling. She was scared and working a marketing coordinator job that doesn't exactly come with gold-plated maternity benefits. She was leaning on my parents a lot, which made sense. She was leaning on me too, which I didn't mind. I helped her figure out her FMLA paperwork. I went with her to one of her early appointments when her roommate couldn't make it. I helped her research daycares. I did all of that because she's my sister and I love her, not because I was signing up for anything. I want to be very clear about that because apparently the line got blurry for some people without me noticing. The baby was born in June. A boy. She named him Eli. He weighed 7 pounds 4 ounces and had this full head of dark hair that looked almost comical on a newborn. I was in the waiting room when he was born. I held him a few hours later. He grabbed my finger and held on like it was a serious commitment, and I felt something complicated in my chest that I couldn't fully name. I visited a few times over the following weeks. I brought meals. I babysat once so Becca could sleep for a real stretch. Normal stuff. Uncle stuff. Then, about 6 weeks after Eli was born, my mom called me and asked if I could come to dinner on Sunday. I said sure. I didn't get the come sit in the living room warning. Maybe because she'd learned, I responded poorly to that. Or maybe she figured if she told me in advance I wouldn't come. I probably wouldn't have. I showed up on Sunday. Becca was there with Eli. My dad was there. My mom had made a roast chicken, which I will also note she only makes for significant occasions. We ate. It was fine. Eli slept through most of it in a little portable bouncer thing Becca had set up near the table. My dad talked about his retirement golf league. My mom talked about the neighbor's new fence. It felt almost normal. Then, after my mom cleared the plates, she sat back down and folded her hands on the table and looked at me in a way that I have learned over 31 years means she is about to ask me to do something I am not going to want to do. We've been thinking, she said. My dad was quiet. Which, with my dad, can go either way. Zack isn't coming back, she continued. We've accepted that. And Becca is doing her best, we know she is, but Eli he's going to need a male figure. Someone stable. Someone who's already there. She paused. You're already there, Adrian. You're already doing so much. We just thought, if you were willing to be a little more intentional about it. A father figure. I looked at her. Then I looked at Becca, who was staring at the table. Then I looked at Eli, who was asleep in the bouncer with his fist pressed against his cheek. You want me to be his father, I said. Not a question, exactly. Not legally, my mom said quickly. Just a consistent presence. Step up in a way that lets him know he has someone. You're not married, you don't have kids of your own. Mom. I'm just saying you have the capacity. Mom. I set my fork down very carefully. I need you to hear what you're asking me. The table got quiet. I help because Becca is my sister, I said. I held Eli because he's my nephew. That is not the same thing as being a father. Not the same thing at all. And the fact that Zack bailed advised doesn't transfer his responsibilities to me. Nobody's saying it's a transfer. What are you saying then? Because it sounds to me like you're saying Zack left, so now someone needs to fill that slot, and I'm available, so it might as well be me. My dad cleared his throat. Son. Nobody's trying to put anything on you unfairly. Aren't you though? I looked at him. Because I feel like there's a very specific thing being asked here. And the reason it's being asked of me and not, I don't know, discussed with a therapist or a counselor or literally anyone qualified, is because I'm the easiest yes in the room. Becca looked up. I didn't ask for this conversation, she said quietly. Just so you know. That stopped me. I looked at her. Mom set this up, she said. I didn't know this was what dinner was. My mom started to say something and my dad said, Diane, in the tone he uses when he means stop, and she did barely. I sat with that for a second. Then I looked at my mom. I think you need to let Becca figure out what she needs and let her ask for it herself. She's a grown adult. She doesn't need you arranging her support system for her. I'm trying to help. I know you are, but helping isn't the same as deciding. I left before dessert. I hugged Becca on the way out and she hugged me back and whispered sorry, and I told her she had nothing to be sorry for. I said goodbye to my parents. It wasn't a blow-up. It was just, the meal was over. I drove home. And I felt that same kind of tired you feel when you realize something has been quietly building for a while, and you just walked into the full weight of it. The calls started after that. My mom called the following Wednesday. She said she felt the conversation had been misunderstood. She said she wasn't asking me to take on a legal role, just to be mindful of the opportunity in front of me. She used the word opportunity 3 times. I said I appreciated her calling in. I'd think about it. I didn't think about it. Then my aunt got involved, which is its own kind of escalation. My mom's older sister, who lives in Cincinnati and has opinions about everything, and delivers them like she's doing you a favor. She texted me a long message about how family steps up in hard times, and that Becca's son deserved better than growing up fatherless. I didn't respond, then, and this is the part I did not see coming, Zack called. It was a Friday night. I stared at his name on my phone for about 4 rings and then picked up mostly out of shock. He sounded cheerful, which made me feel something I don't have a clean word for. He said he'd been talking to my mom. He said he wanted me to know that he thought it made sense. That Eli would be better off, with a stable person in his life, and that I was clearly already invested. He said he'd be relieved to know his, and then he paused and corrected himself. That Eli would be looked after. I said, are you calling to give me permission to parent your son? Silence, because I want to understand what's happening here. Your mom apologized to me on your behalf. My mom is hosting dinners to ask me to step in. And now you're calling to tell me you'd feel better knowing someone else is handling this. That's not. I mean, I didn't. Zack, do you understand that this is your child? That you made him? That nothing about what you're describing involves you taking any responsibility whatsoever? He said something about not being ready. About not being cut out for fatherhood. About how he thought it was better for the baby, Not to have a father who was checked out and resentful. I said. That's a very convenient philosophy. He got quiet again. I told him I wasn't going to step in. Not because I didn't love my nephew, but because what everyone was arranging was not actually for Eli's benefit. It was for everyone else's comfort. It let my parents feel like the problem was solved. It let Zack feel absolved. It let the family avoid the harder conversation, which was that Zack needed to either show up or formally and legally establish what his non-involvement looked like. Because you can't just ghost your way out of a child's life and call it a personal philosophy. He didn't have a response to that. I said goodbye and hung up. I called Becca that night, just to check in. She answered on the second ring and said she'd been wanting to talk to me. She sounded tired in the way that new parents always sound tired, but there was something else in it too. I asked her how she was really doing. She was quiet for a second and then she said, "I'm really angry." I said, "At me?" "No," she said. "At all of them. At Mom for running this whole campaign, I guess. At Zack for being exactly who he's always secretly been. At myself a little, for not seeing it sooner." She exhaled. "And I want you to know that I don't want you to be Eli's dad. That's not what I want. He has a dad. That dad is just a coward." I asked her what she did want. "I want people to stop solving this problem by shuffling it around," she said. "And I want Zack to pay child support like a human being, which my lawyer is working on. And I want Mom to trust me to figure out my own life." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Just because she said it so clearly, and I realized we'd both been waiting for the same thing, which was for someone to say it out loud. "I can still come around," I said, "as your brother. As Eli's uncle. That's not going anywhere." "I know," she said. "That's all I wanted." The month after that was uncomfortable in the way that months are uncomfortable. When you've said honest things to people, and they're still metabolizing it. My mom was polite but stiff on our next few calls. My aunt stopped texting, which was a relief. My dad called me once, just to talk about the Bengals, which I understood as his version of olive branch. And I accepted it in that spirit. Zack went quiet again. His lawyer. Turns out he got a lawyer, which is somewhat ironic, sent Becca some paperwork, proposing minimal involvement, and minimal support. Her lawyer sent back a counter. That process is ongoing. One Sunday, in September, I went to my parents' place again. My mom made pot roast. Becca came with Eli, who was 3 months old by then, and had figured out how to smile in a way that felt specifically engineered to make adults feel important. My dad held him for the better part of an hour. My mom cried a little, the good kind. Nobody asked me to be anything other than what I was. After dinner I sat on the back porch with my dad, while my mom and Becca did whatever they do in the kitchen when they're talking without us. My dad had a beer, I had a Coke. He was quiet for a while. Which with him usually means he's building up to something. He said, "I want you to know your mother means well." I said, "I know she does," he said. "She has a hard time watching something be broken and not trying to fix it." I said, "So do I. The difference is I don't try to fix it by making someone else hold the pieces." He looked at me, then he nodded. It wasn't a big moment. My dad doesn't do big moments. But it felt like understanding, and that was enough. A few weeks later, Zack's mom sent Becca a card with a check in it. A few $100s, nothing enormous, but more than she'd gotten from Zack himself. A note inside said she was sorry for her son, that she hoped Becca and Eli were well, and that the door was open if Becca ever felt comfortable. I don't know what Becca did with that. It's not my call. Eli is 4 months old now. I see him on weekends sometimes. He's starting to recognize me. Makes this very specific face when I walk in the door, halfway between curiosity and accusation. Like he's not yet sure what my deal is, but he's filing the data. I like that about him. I like that he's already forming opinions. I'm his uncle. That's a real thing, that's a good thing. That's what I signed up for. And that's exactly what I'm showing up to be. I didn't take anyone's place, I held my own. And when Eli's old enough to understand what happened, when he starts asking the questions that kids inevitably ask, I hope what he knows is that the people who loved him showed up as exactly who they were. Not as substitutes. Not as solutions. Not as someone else's answer to a problem they didn't want to solve themselves. Just as his family. Honestly, and without apology. That has to be enough. And honestly, it is.